I agree with what everybody else has said. But I think that it might sound kind of awkward to come from the community college person about the young people, but I have 4 grandchildren. I think about children a lot. I think about children because they're our future, and I think about my 4 grandchildren where they're going to be fine because they both have, all of them have 2 parents at home. The parents work, but then when they come home from work, they can split up and take care of the kids, and they're very active. And then I also think, though, about the kids that may not have parents who both work or neither work. We come from our district has a lot of poverty, a lot of school district, as people have mentioned, where the children don't have enough to eat. They may be going home and there's no one there to help with them, help them get through the day, or their parents are working at night. So there may not be as many support systems as some of the rest of us grew up with. And I think, to me, that's one of our big issues is that pre-K, first just trying to get them ready to get to first grade and second grade and third grade. Because if they're not ready then, and I was something with a Superintendent Perry, I was at another discussion with her where she was talking, someone was saying that it was just terrible about the report cards that came out, and she was talking about how there are some of the students that come in kindergarten and in kindergarten are not ready. They'll never be ready by third grade to read, but they're hoping that by 8th grade they can get them. So just think about taking that many years, and then what happens is they get to 8th grade, and then they're going to high school, and then they get these choices about what classes to take, and then when they don't take the classes that will help them with college and career, then they're not ready for college either. And so I think it really is the real continuum and trying to figure out how do we start with the youngest of us, and then getting to a place where they are ready for that career, or hopefully for college.
One of the things I like to, again, as the moderator, I get to add some things that I'm not sure folks that are going to be viewing this or folks in the audience necessarily recognize yet, but how special it is that on an evening in November, we have the president of the university, the president of the community college that serves this community, the superintendent of the school district, parents, grandparents, former teachers involved. Earlier this morning, I was at another event with Superintendent Perry talking about how we can expand some of the CTEC experiences throughout the boundaries. One of the things that is truly special about this community that you don't see in many others is how much Western, Chemeketa, Central, Salem-Keizer all work together, and that's a tip of the hat to everybody involved. That's the good news. That's the thing that has changed, I think, over the last 30 years, that people are starting to work better together across the lines. Here's the question for the second round. The second question is, and again, as a person who's been teaching, sadly, I can say this 20 plus years now too, I know I recognize some changes in the landscape of education. But from your perspective, whether it's from your individual perspective or your organizational perspective, for the folks that don't live education every day, what are some things that are really fundamentally different in terms of the landscape that we sometimes have to pause and recognize when we're talking about resources or structures or systems? Because most people are very busy in their lives. They're working. They're trying to pay the bills. They're trying to do their thing. They don't necessarily think about, when they hear about high school, for example, they remember their own experience, but they don't necessarily know what's going on right now. So in a broad or specific way, how do you think the landscape has really shifted over the last 20 years in education in Oregon?
I'd be glad to take that one.
Okay.
The first thing that I have here on my list has already been addressed, but I want to talk about it anyway, and that's class size. When I was teaching back in the day, and I did retire 16 years ago, I had one class. It was a Chemeketa 2+2 class. It was in technical writing. I had 2 sections of it, and one of the classes had 38 kids in it, and I just had a fit. I just jumped up and down and said, "What do you mean you're putting 38 kids in my class? This is English. I can't do 38 kids." Well, I did do 38 kids because that's what happened. and I think that I truly remember that most math or science teachers simply did not have more than 28 kids in a class back then. Today, I see kindergarten classes with 31, 32 kids in them. Kindergarten. I see high school English classes with, it's the norm, 38 to 42 kids, or 48. It's across the board. Math classes, the same. And the thing that disturbs me about that is that the younger teachers who are coming into the school system see that as normal. They see that as perfectly all right. They take on that job responsibility. How in the world can they expect, if they have 6 or 7 classes a day, how can they expect to have any kind of a relationship with any of their students when they have upwards of 40 kids in every class that they teach? I think it's just an abysmal situation, and I don't even know what to say about that. The other thing, the change in the landscape, if I may, I got out of teaching when the getting was good, when it came to cell phones and internet, because we were just starting to get computers in the classroom, and the kids were, I was so excited the day I got my own cell phone, and I had the kids help me, learn how to use that cell phone. And today, in some of the schools, every kid has a classroom out in every class, and they're texting each other or whatever they do. And I think that's really, really a change in the landscape, and the use of internet so that kids have access to information. They can get facts or what they perceive as facts. And I think that it's very important to teach students today using the internet, which is a wonderful resource to have, right there in front of you, but to teach kids how to discern the difference between what is fact and what is not fact, and then to take the information that they get from the internet and learn to create for themselves. And I think that's a real challenge that we have in today's world with the internet coming into the schools and cell phones.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, yeah, I'll riff off of that a little bit. We're thinking that perhaps there's a little less of a sense of community for our kids as they communicate more and more by cell phone and social media, and less face-to-face and participating in community groups. And we see that with our own son. And kind of relatedly, that it seems like the world is becoming a scarier and scarier place. And you can read that today's youth have a lot more anxiety and depression. So we're thinking right now the reliance on the social media and the cell phones and lack of community kind of feeds into that anxiety and depression. Dealing with emotions and communications all through the phone, and not having that human interaction, we think kind of feeds into that anxiety. So that's, for us, we think that's a big part of a changed landscape that our son is growing up in.
Interesting. All right, thank you. Yes.
It's interesting because right, put myself in the kids' shoes of what they're having to work through technology-wise. Like, I think back, if I were a college student now, I'm glad there was no internet, as an example. So again, I think part of what we have to be knowledgeable about, and just because I appreciate what you both have said, because it has changed the landscape for our students, but also how they use that as a communication tool, because it is a communication tool to them, and to some degree a learning tool within the classrooms. Some use it inappropriately. Right? Some use it inappropriately in how you have those conversations, but it definitely is something that we have to be wary of, because that's the world. They have so much information coming at them that they're having to discern as a critical thinker of what's real, what's not, because there is so much out there. You can get every view that you want. I think that's the plus of it, because now they have to work through that. I think that's where we have some work to do in education, in working through that piece of it in 21st century. I think because our communities are becoming more diverse, and really how do we work together when we are living, growing, learning as a community where we may have differences. And so how do we agree to disagree? How do we have those continued conversations to, keep moving forward of our learning, of which they are involved in that because of the 21st technology that's at their fingertips. So I think that's an important piece of that. Part of that for me then goes to the emotional intelligence, which ties back into that. How do they really build relationships so they're getting the communication this way of relationships, but also then how do we keep growing to say, you also have to do this, communication, because that's an important part as you develop as an adult, and having both of those. I live in the Twitter world a little bit, and so being in that world with them I've grown a lot. There's a lot of learning I have done, and so I'm appreciative of the youth and sort of pushing my thinking as well as an educator and as a learner, because I do think those are some of the key things in the landscape that we are having to work through in those challenges.
Thank you. President Eckstein.
Well, for the K-12, I think the number of school days, the number of class time, I think that because again, if I'm going back to where we start with the children, it's hard when they're not in school as much as I think that we would like them to be, and that they have that time. Even if it's a large classroom, at least they're hopefully getting something out of that. I think that another thing that's concerned me for a number of years now is just the lack of respect that there is towards our K-12 teachers. I think that I think that
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I just think that it is. I think it's a travesty that the way that individuals believe it's okay to treat our teachers, who are the ones that are in there with our kids all the time. If we think about what message we're giving them. When it comes to the community college or university, what I think is different is there's a lot more distraction. I think that there used to be distraction, but now there's a lot more. And the community colleges have always worked and attended classes, but now they also can be on their cell phones or on their iPads, whatever they're doing, and then doing these multiple things. So who knows how much they're really listening when they're actually in class. Another issue that I think, and some of you may recognize this, is that I learned last year when I was co-teaching a first-year experience class about the students that come directly from high school into the community college all of a sudden think that there's different messages in the K-12 senior year than the community college, because what would happen is sometimes the students think that, I don't really have to follow the syllabus and turn all these assignments in because you're going to let me have extra credit, right? Because it doesn't really matter until I ask you for. So I think there's a disconnect, even as much as you try to tell them that no, you do follow the syllabus and you're not in, you really are in charge of your own time now. So I think that that's part of that as well.
Can I add? I think where some of the piece between what I'm going to call K-12 and then the shift to either college or career is I don't think we've figured out what is college and career ready.
Right.
I mean, I think we have some first steps of that, but I think there are some pieces that we still don't have that connection, because we still see students after their second year. We still lose a lot of kids in college or in a second year, or even at times in training. So there's still some things we're having to tweak, both of us on both ends, to figure that out a little bit.
And I would kind of call that reaching in.
Yep.
And so what we've been, talking about and still trying to figure out is how do we reach into the high schools more, especially in those areas where kids or students are not quite ready yet. How do we reach back in so that we're working together to help them get more ready, so that when they do come to the college, because they're paying for it, someone's paying for that again, so that they're ready, they're not having to take some of the classes that they may feel that they already took in high school, but then having to pay for it as well. So I think that's that's part of what we're doing. And again, we also are doing that in partnership with Western when it comes to the pipeline from the community college to the university as well. So
One of the, just to add to this before we get to the third question, because I concur, as a classroom instructor at Chemeketa, one of the things that I am constantly reminded is how much I'm a 19th century man in the 21st century. It is a struggle for me on a daily basis to remember that the folks in my class are not 18, 19-year-old airmen or soldiers, whereas that was my previous life experience. So it is a different time, and as the systems and structures try to adjust to both the good and the bad of the time we're living in, I think that your perspectives are really helpful, because that, when is a person an adult? When is a person ready for the next phase? How do we have systems communicate in such a way that the expectations are slowly building so that people get those clues, internal and external, to move forward? So I think that that's great.
Well, can I add one more thing about that, Paul? I think the other thing that's happened that I've noticed is even though we all expect when students come to college that they're going to know to work in groups, they've used their phones and other things to text and communicate so much that they're not really ready, that what we've seen at times, ready to work in those groups. So even though they don't necessarily want to listen to a lecture, this has been my perspective anyway, even though they don't want to listen to a lecture, they still also struggle with that. How do we work as a team? Because we're so used to looking at our phone.
Mm-hmm.
Or, yeah, so anyway.
So